The sun barely peeked over the dense pines as she opened her eyes to the crisp, cold air of the cabin. At first, she thought she was dreaming, lulled by the rhythmic sound of leaves rustling in the wind. But the ache in her body, the dull throb of her heart, and the distant creak of the wooden walls reminded her that this was all too real. Just weeks ago, she had been in the comfort of her own home, surrounded by the familiarity of furniture she had carefully chosen, the walls that had held her memories, and the garden she had nurtured since her children were young. Now she was here, far from everything she knew, left alone in a remote forest by the very people who were supposed to care for her. She remembered the illness that had weakened her, that had made her dependent for the first time in decades, a vulnerability she had never imagined would be exploited. Her daughter-in-law had been hovering, offering help with a soft smile that masked a sharp, calculating edge. Papers had been slid in front of her under the guise of medical forms, papers she signed without thought, trusting them as part of her care. Months later, the consequences of that trust became clear. Her son, the child she had raised with so much hope and pride, had abandoned her here under the pretense of fresh air being good for her recovery. It was a lie, a cruel, deliberate lie. At first, fear and confusion overwhelmed her. The cabin felt like a prison. She realized quickly that there was no phone service, no immediate way to contact the outside world. Yet, amid the fear, a spark of clarity ignited. She was not a weak woman. She had faced challenges before, hardships that could have broken lesser spirits, and she would not let these betrayals define her. Carefully, she explored the cabin, examining the sparse furnishings and the old wood stove. She knew she would need to ration her energy, plan each step, and rely on the endurance that had carried her through every difficulty of her life. Days passed slowly. She learned the rhythm of the forest, the sound of the creek nearby, the distant cry of an owl, the way the morning mist softened the edges of the trees. She used these hours to recover physically, but also mentally, piecing together the events that had brought her here. It was then, as she sifted through her memories and the scattered documents left behind, that the harsh truth struck her fully. Her house, her paid-off home, the place that held every laugh, every tear, every story of her family, had been mortgaged without her knowledge. The papers she had signed, thinking them medical forms, had been twisted into instruments of fraud. Her heart sank, but despair did not take hold. She knew action had to be taken, not in haste, but in precision. She began to plan her escape, tracing the terrain in her mind and identifying the highest ridges where the signal might reach her phone. The trek was grueling. The forest, once serene, now seemed like a maze designed to trap her. Twisting roots, uneven ground, and cold winds that cut through her clothes tested her resolve. She stumbled, fell, and rose again, each step a defiance of the betrayal she had suffered. Hours turned into a day, and then another, until finally she reached a rocky outcrop where the weak bars of a signal flickered across her phone screen like a distant lighthouse guiding her. With trembling hands, she dialed her bank. Her voice, though tired, carried a firmness that demanded attention. She explained the situation, detailing the unauthorized mortgage, her incapacity during the time the documents were signed, and her suspicion of fraud. The bank, initially skeptical, requested medical records to verify her claims. Gathering these from her physician, who was quick to confirm her condition during the signing of the papers, she built a case that left little room for doubt. She contacted a lawyer recommended by a trusted friend, a professional who immediately understood the urgency and gravity of the situation. Meanwhile, her son and daughter-in-law, unaware that she had begun to fight back, continued their charade. They organized a gathering with relatives, presenting themselves as the caring family and painting her as a senile woman incapable of understanding her own affairs. Sympathy was their weapon, and they wielded it with practiced ease. But they had underestimated her. The mother's lawyer, guided by meticulous documentation, prepared a clear and undeniable record of fraud and incapacity. When the confrontation came, the mother did not enter timidly. She arrived at the gathering not with anger, but with a quiet authority that silenced the room. Her neighbor, an elderly man who had once served as a judge, stepped forward as a voice of reason. With a calm, deliberate tone, he exposed the lies of her son and daughter-in-law, recounting events and cross-referencing them with her medical history and the timeline of the mortgage. Relatives. Life in the forest was not easy at first. Each morning brought new challenges, from icy winds that crept through the cracks in her small cabin to nights filled with strange sounds that made her heart race. But over time, she learned to read the rhythms of the wilderness. She discovered which plants were edible, how to catch small fish from the nearby creek, and which herbs could ease her lingering aches from illness. Every task she accomplished, no matter how small, strengthened her resolve. She began to understand that survival was not merely physical. It required a sharp mind and unwavering focus, and she had both. One afternoon, while collecting firewood, she heard a distant cry, a sound so faint that she almost dismissed it as the wind. But her instincts told her otherwise. She followed the sound, carefully navigating the underbrush until she found a young girl trapped in a thicket, her ankle twisted painfully. The girl explained that she had wandered too far while playing with friends and couldn't make it back home. Without hesitation, the mother helped her out, carrying the girl part of the way and guiding her safely to the nearest village road. This small act of kindness earned her trust among the locals, who began to see her not as a helpless elderly woman, but as someone capable and courageous. Meanwhile, the battle over her house continued, though she faced it from a distance. Every time she managed to get a signal, she coordinated with her lawyer, sending documents and receiving updates on the freeze of her assets. She learned that her son and daughter-in-law were growing desperate, their attempts to maintain control increasingly reckless. They had begun to borrow against the house, believing they could intimidate the bank into ignoring the fraud, but every move they made was countered by the evidence she had carefully assembled. The mother began to document everything meticulously. She kept a journal of each day's events in the cabin, the weather, her hikes for signal, her interactions with villagers, the progress of her legal battle. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to order her thoughts and give structure to a life that had suddenly become chaotic. She also started sketching the forest, the trees, and the wildlife around her. These sketches, though simple, captured the serenity and beauty of her surroundings, reminding her that life could still hold moments of joy, even in the midst of betrayal. As the legal proceedings escalated, her son and daughter-in-law grew more aggressive. They attempted to intimidate neighbors, spread rumors, and even went so far as to hire a private investigator to discredit her. But she had allies now. The elderly neighbor who had much served as a judge became a constant source of support, advising her on strategy, accompanying her to meetings, and speaking truthfully in front of the community. Other villagers, moved by her courage and fairness, began to offer assistance, sharing information, providing supplies, and offering moral support. One particularly tense day, she decided to visit the nearby town to check on court updates in person. She walked along the winding forest trails for hours, her determination unwavering despite the aches in her legs and the sharp sting of cold air. When she finally arrived, she found her son and daughter-in-law waiting in the courthouse lobby, attempting to intimidate her with false claims and fake sympathy. But she walked in with her head held high, presenting her evidence calmly and methodically. Every lie they told was countered with facts. Every attempt at manipulation met with clarity and reason. By the end of the day, even some of their most loyal supporters began to see the truth, and whispers of doubt spread like wildfire. Back in the forest, life gradually found a rhythm. She planted more flowers and vegetables, tending to each with care and watching as life returned in full color around her cabin. Birds nested in the trees she had planted, deer cautiously approached the clearing at dusk, and rabbits played along the creek banks. Her connection with nature deepened, and she realized that the betrayal of her family had inadvertently led her to a life she might never have discovered otherwise, a life of independence, beauty, and freedom. She also began to reflect deeply on her relationships, questioning the dynamics that allowed betrayal to fester. Memories of her son's childhood, of sleepless nights and tender moments surfaced with a mix of love and sorrow. She grieved the loss of the closeness she once had with him, but she did not let grief consume her. With the last remnants of the legal battle behind her, she felt a peace she had never known. The son and daughter-in-law had faded from her life, their attempts to dominate and manipulate exposed and powerless. No longer did she carry the weight of fear or betrayal. Instead, her days were filled with purpose, joy, and the simple satisfaction of living life on her own terms. She woke with the sun, tending her garden, watching flowers bloom in colors brighter than she had ever imagined, and feeling the soft hum of life around her that was entirely of her making. She built routines that nourished both body and soul. Each morning she collected fresh water from the spring, feeling its cool flow against her hands. She walked along forest paths, greeting birds and deer as if they were old friends. She experimented with cooking, creating meals from the vegetables she grew, herbs she gathered, and wild fruits she learned to identify. She shared these meals with neighbors and friends, turning her home into a place of warmth and laughter, where stories were told and bonds were forged, naturally, without obligation or pretense. Her garden became her sanctuary and her legacy. The roses she planted climbed gracefully along trellises, and sunflowers swayed proudly in the sunlight. The vegetables she grew nourished her and those she invited into her life, and even the smallest seedlings became symbols of resilience, of life pushing through adversity. Each day as she touched the soil, she reflected on the hardship she had endured, the deceit, the abandonment, the treachery of those she had once trusted, and felt a quiet triumph. They had tried to break her, to strip her of her home and dignity, but they had failed. She had not only survived, she had flourished. She became a source of inspiration quietly, without grand announcements. People came to her seeking guidance, wanting to learn how she had reclaimed her life. She taught them the power of patience, of careful observation, and of acting with courage even when the world seemed against you. Her story spread slowly, carried by whispers and word of mouth, not as a tale of vengeance, but as a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure and triumph. Time softened the sharp edges of the betrayal, leaving lessons etched into her heart. She forgave, not to absolve the wrongdoers, but to free herself from carrying the weight of anger and bitterness. Each morning, as she breathed in the fresh air of the forest, she smiled, knowing that she had reclaimed more than her property. She had reclaimed her freedom, her dignity, and her joy. The cabin that had once been a place of fear now existed only in memory, a crucible that had forged her resilience. The seasons changed, and she embraced each one with gratitude. Winter brought quiet reflection, spring a renewal of life, summer a time of abundance in her garden, and autumn a reminder of beauty in letting go. She celebrated small victories, from the first bloom of a rare flower to successfully growing a new vegetable crop, and these moments became milestones of her reclaimed life. In her later years, she lived surrounded by friends who had become family, in a home that she had chosen for herself, on land that reflected her independence. She remained active, curious, and engaged with the world around her, her laughter filling the air as naturally as the song of the birds. Each day she felt the deep satisfaction of living authentically, guided by her own choices rather than the manipulations of others. And as the sun set over her garden, casting long shadows among the trees and flowers, she would sit quietly, reflecting on the path that had brought her here. The hardships, the betrayals, and the solitude had all been part of the journey. They had tested her, shaped her, and ultimately led her to a life far richer and freer than she could have imagined. She had been abandoned, deceived, and underestimated, but in the end, she had triumphed. She had built a life of resilience, peace, and beauty, a life that belonged entirely to her. She had been betrayed, yes, but she had also awakened. She had fought back, reclaimed what was hers, and in doing so discovered a strength and freedom that could never be taken away. And in that quiet, simple, radiant life she had created, she knew she was truly, fully free.